what is reasonable to expect developmentally of children of certain ages, and when should I be concerned? So we'll come back to that, but I want you to know that it's there. And finally, what I've already said, how do we as a set of providers across the region in your communities think about how all of us support the social emotional well-being in young children? That's what we're calling mental health. It's not a pathology idea, it's a well-being idea. And it's about supporting social emotional well-being in young children. And what are the ways that we do that? And so one of them, and really one that SAMHSA promotes, and one that probably we're all using, is how we screen and refer as needed, and really starting to see yourselves as part of an early childhood mental health workforce. So those are our training objectives. For today, we're going to kind of drill down a little bit after we review a little bit of what happened in session one, kind of the takeaways, is really taking a few moments to think about risk factors, red flags, and protective factors. And I want to underscore that because I think we're a little too good at identifying risk factors, deficits, difficulties, whatever. And I want us to take the chance to really balance that out by really saying, how do we do this? And also look at protective factors. And most communities, I think, and certainly on the promotion and prevention end, people are really thinking from a strengthening families perspective and really pull those 5 pillars down and think about those ways. So we all may be doing those things, and those are great, but I want us to really think about this as a balance. And how might we use screening, not just for risk factors, but for protective factors as a way to kind of think of a universal approach. How are we currently doing that? And all of that leads to the idea of how we promote resilience for children and families as a community. So not in our silos. I mean, I feel like one of the things I've learned being in your communities that's been a real gift is I think, tell me if you think this is true, and those of you out there in remote land who I'm talking to, my experience is in rural communities, there's actually more collaboration among different silos. Oh, I see looks that don't necessarily support that. I don't know, yes or no. Than in my urban setting, where I feel like we're siloed into, this is regional center, this is education, this is mental health, this is health. And though we try and come together, each system may be overwhelmed itself. And how we come into kind of community and think about children together is interesting. But I've run into fantastic experiences up here where people come to the same table, literally, who may be sharing families and talk about their clinical work, their casework, how to serve families, where people come to learning communities together. And so it's kind of been a great thing to come up to some of the communities and really see how that's already working. So I think that idea of how we promote resilience as a community effort is part of what we're doing. I'm holding this clicker like it's a microphone. Have you noticed that?
I did the same thing.
The microphone, for those of you, I'm wearing like a lapel mic and holding a clicker, and I'm talking into my clicker. Okay, a little self-awareness. Okay, so why should we focus on early childhood mental health? So you all know this. This is our mini review of where we've been. We all know the term sensitive period or critical period. We're calling the first 3 years or the early years a sensitive period, particularly for brain plasticity and brain architecture and the impact of trauma. That is, we're kind of building a system. We're building a brain. We're building a physiological system in terms of how it reacts to experience. So we think of those early years as a sensitive period where the idea of co-regulation, that is, infants don't regulate themselves completely. They need a co-regulator, which happens as a relationship. So the importance of that is a really good reason to focus on the early years. We know that those very first relationships, the importance of that child-caregiver relationship as a foundation of trust and emotional regulation and self-esteem. So babies essentially learn to regulate by being regulated and beginning to internalize that themselves. My favorite example of this, which isn't quite a regulation story, is my first son, my oldest son, now very grown up, was a really active child, and he started walking really, really young. And I spent a lot of time walking after him and trying to keep him safe, because when you walk at 9 months, it's not great. And the first time I heard him say, must have been like 15 or 16 months, he was climbing on someone, and I heard him say, "Be careful," to himself. And I'm like, yes, I'm in there. I made it in there. Like that co-regulation becomes self-regulation. Words become things that we can use to manage our behavior. So we need those relationships, and they're really important. And then we also know, unfortunately, about the prevalence of behavioral difficulties in young children. And I think maybe we all know this, but the highest incidence of expulsion from school is in preschoolers. And I think the people dealing with older kids, like high schoolers, don't really know that. But for a whole variety of reasons, we've reached this point where difficulties in regulation and behavior are really causing a lot of challenges. And so that's why we want to focus on it. Okay, the other kind of take-home messages about relationships. Who you are and what you do and how you do it is absolutely critical and a huge piece of the intervention that you do, meaning you are the tool through which information flows and people experience, kind of what can happen. So how you are really matters. And so we want to bring a self-awareness to our relationships. You need to spend some time in your agencies and in a kind of self-reflective way, knowing what you bring to a relationship. So that means all of our experiences, our own traumas, our own triggers, implicit bias, preferences, all of those things we bring into a relationship, and it can land in all sorts of ways across a continuum from positive to negative. So we all need to be aware of that. We need to really challenge ourselves to see the child the parent sees. So I think in a lot of cases, we see a child that is different than the child that the parent sees. And we need to find a way to join parents in at least seeing multiple children, the one that we see and the one the parent sees, because really you can't really connect with a parent's understanding until you do that deep dive into thinking about that. So that's about what concerns them and not what concerns us. And those of us who are on the receiving end of referrals, I hear this a lot. I get a lot of referrals in my own program from pediatricians, and the pediatricians have concerns. But when we try and contact the parent, they're like, I wasn't worried about that. So there's that kind of difference, and we need to slow down a little bit and think about that. We need to think of parents as our partners and collaborators, and I've kind of put down here the idea of pacing. I like the idea of kind of drop and explore, meaning don't rush through, don't do too much. I was about to feel like strategies and what we're trying to do here is kind of an example of drop and explore, except it's a little more of a flood and explore, not drop of information or ideas, more of a stream. But I like that idea because it's about pacing. Like all of these ideas are ones that we could slow down and really unpack in quite a slower way. And we need to think about that with parents as well. The language that we use, a shortcut, meaning language can hurt or heal. And as you train yourself to listen to how people present information or talk to parents, we have to be really mindful. Intervention is what we're after. Focus on the relationship, multiple relationships, your relationship with parents, parents' relationships with children. There's a parallel, meaning how you are is as important as what you do. Making meaning, really important. So that's part of understanding a child, their behavior, and the meaning that we all make of what's going on. We're going to do a little slowing down of that in this session and the next one, in terms of thinking of how we make meaning of children's behavior, what they're trying to tell us. And then a reminder about these 2-generation approaches. So this is another handout you probably can't see, but it looks good on a slide. It's a little better for those of you looking. So the 2-generation idea, to me, feels like it's really supportive of a whole family model and a relationship. If you're someone who's on the child side, meaning you're providing child-focused intervention, remember that there's a parent and think about the kinds of things that you can do to support parents as well. And that could be skill development or literacy or help with food insecurity or screenings, depression screenings, because really what's happening with the parent is really affecting our young children. So in what ways, and I know that some programs have things like parent cafes and family resource, networks, has a lot of good parent education. I think the developmental playgroups are a great example where kind of parents and children are there together and there's some sense of connecting with parents as well. If you're on the parent focus side, which most of us probably are not, but I think it's that sense of how do we really do something that connects parents, adults with their role as parents. And we had a really great opportunity in our community to take a father's program and partner with a job development program for men in reentry coming out of Santa Rita jail. And that idea that over here, this organization was doing job training and reentry services for men. And we brought in, most of these men are fathers, and how can we do something that supports their role as fathers and really bring that piece in and partner with them was a really great kind of community partnership for us that was doing that. So I like this idea of 2-generation, and we should really think about that. Okay, that was the mini review of session 1. And those of you in the room and those of you out there, I don't have to be just a talking person. And if you want to slow me down and have a question, and those of you at your computers, write it in. If you have a thought, if you have an idea, write it in because we can slow down and really address questions. So let me pause for a moment and see if there's any comments or questions in the room or out there in remote. Okay. Okay, so let's think about risk and protective factors, and let me get you involved in thinking about this with me. Now, I've listed these up here as both risk and protective factors. So let's think together and about how we think about this. So when we think of a child factor, what comes to mind? So you can think about risk first if you want. You can think about protection because sometimes they overlap. But when I say a child risk factor, for instance, what do you think about? Poverty.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've gone to the environmental social factor thing, that the poverty, that an environmental factor as a risk factor can affect the child's development.
Yeah.
Okay. What else? Disability. So you're going to a child factor, right? So you're thinking of something constitutionally about the child, something genetically or a birth constitutional factor that affects the child. Mm-hmm. What else?
Safety.
Safety. Say more about that.
That the child would feels safe.
Wait, we need that microphone. Can I?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sorry.
Well, let's pass this around.
Oh, and to clarify for those of you in the hub, the microphone, it obviously doesn't amplify you in this room. It's so that the other
people can hear you. And those of you listening to this, when I ask it to the people in Humboldt, I'm asking it to you too. So write in, we have people who can read out your responses, risk factors, or okay, so safety.
Okay, I guess I was thinking about safety and child abuse.
Child abuse. Okay, so you're there, you've moved into a relationship factor in a way. There's something happening between the relational part of what's happening in the child that's not safe. Yeah. Okay, what else? Temperament. Okay, temperament as a child factor. So really feeling like your temperament, what I was about to say is your temperament can be both a risk factor and a protective factor. A really good example of that. So some babies are just easier than others. So let's take a fussy baby. You can really see how a fussy baby or a baby with what we used to think of as colic or a child who has more, has a different activity level, or can organize themselves better or worse than others, can really set up a relational context that can be really challenging. And so that temperament can be something that like pulls something out of people. So some kids feel like they're easier to get along with, or their capacity to explore in the world, or their anxiety about risk taking or things like that. All of those factors can really be both risk and protective factors. Yeah. Birth order. I'm kind of repeating what everyone says. Okay, say more about birth order.
Well, I think for me, it was always as a parent thinking, would my middle child have been different as the firstborn, or how would I have been different as his parent if he were my first child?
Do you
Or
think of it as a risk order, a risk factor, or a protective factor?
I think it could be both. I mean, I think that depending on, I think there's other factors that come into play, but I think that having the older sibling could be a protective factor or a risk factor as
Okay.
well, or being.
So really, you're talking about it as a kind of environmental factor, meaning if you're not the first, or even if you are the first, but after the first, you're born into an environment
Right.
that includes some of these other things. My parents are busier than whatever. I have these other siblings running around. So your birth order essentially creates an environmental context.
And I think also that, that parents are older or more experienced, so maybe the younger siblings are actually getting a different parent experience than what the first kind of see what happens.
Yeah, we could spend the whole time talking about this. I think those people who say, I don't understand why my children are so different because they were born into the same family. No, that's never, nobody who's had more than one child believes that. And each child both pulls something out of you that's different. They have their own temperament, and they're born into a different context completely. Yeah, anything else? Yeah.
The age of the child.
The age of the child. Okay, say more.
So a child who is a newborn or a baby is more vulnerable than a 3-year-old. So it could be a risk
so we're
factor.
getting into this notion of developmental capacities and exactly how you manage your environment and how your developmental capabilities really change with age. And so clearly an older child can manage a whole lot of things that a younger child can't. Yes. Anything else? People out in the remote sites on your computer, anybody writing in? Nobody's writing in. Come on, write in. I want to hear from you. We want to hear from you. Don't just.
We're seeing bubbles, bonding and attachment.
Oh, yeah, you single parents and dual parents.
Oh, you're seeing them up here.
Yeah. Parent with mental illness.
Oh, okay, parent. So talking about a parent factor. Okay, mental illness in a parent, a caregiver. And so let's just use, say, depression as an example, because that's one of the things that a lot of people are screening for. We can talk about that. You may or may not know this, but now OBs can charge for depression screening. Charge meaning they can get reimbursed for doing depression screens. So suddenly, when you have a system like that that enables you to be reimbursed, it's something that you can incorporate universally in your practice in a way that makes it way more affordable. And we're getting a lot more screening of depression on the pre-birth, prenatal side. So I think that idea of mental health or serious mental illness like schizophrenia and what that does in a relational context and how that affects, actually, that's a good one. Anybody else? We saw some others up there.
There were some bubbles. What did the bubbles say here?
So we have mother's behavioral health, age of caregiver, exposure to trauma, parenting style, either category, access to resources, single parent versus dual parent, bonding and attachment, risk factor, parent with mental illness, and parent relationship ACEs, and domestic violence.
Okay, great. What a great list. So we've generated this huge list of things that really span, I think, all of these kinds of factors. Some of them are in the child brings, some the parent brings. And so we had a lot of those from writing in the idea of what the parent brings in terms of really their own temperament, their own circumstances, the context or social, environmental context that they promote, and also some that I heard were relational. So when we start talking about attachment and kind of secure attachments versus insecure attachments, we're talking about relationship factors. And there are these factors within the parent-child relationship that I think become things that we really want to think about, and things that you start to take in as you start to assess, what am I seeing in front of me? So something as simple as goodness of fit, you know what I mean by that, kind of a match. So you can be a bad match to your child, you know, in a way. And I, again, think of my oldest child. My children would be so horrified to know that I talk about them. But my oldest son was really, really, really busy. It was okay that for us and our family that he was busy, we could kind of do that. But I think he would have been a bad match to somebody who really needed or could manage more, a child who needed to sit and read and be in one place. Okay, that can be a really kind of bad connection, and people can feel like it's me, it's them, he's hyperactive, I'm whatever. So those kinds of things can be difficult, as can things like a depressed parent, you know, who doesn't have the energy to kind of do something, or even a parent who's misattributing, who really thinks of something as like volitional, like a child who throws something down and who sees that as aggression as opposed to something that may be more developmentally appropriate. So, and you can also see how some of the things that were mentioned, even though we lean in the direction of the risk factors, can also be protective factors. So temperament, I think, is a really great example of that. But all of those attachment and relationship and even environmental factors can be real protective things as well. So I think we tend to think of risk and protection this way, meaning I like the fulcrum idea that we have negative outcomes and positive outcomes, and exactly what we're putting on each of those sides tends to be something that we're trying to keep in balance. And so we do know from the ACEs research in particular, because I think everyone's now been exposed to that, that the idea of kind of cumulative experiences that are on the negative side start to create a toxic stress situation where you really start to, what ACEs really did was, I think, to really show people, wow, this can really affect your body and your long-term health. But I think the other part of that, which we've known for a long time, is this notion that cumulative stressors increase this probability of poor outcomes. And so no matter where we are on the care continuum of providing services to family, we need to balance out those negative outcomes with positive outcomes. And the question is, what can we bring to the situation to kind of increase that? So these next two slides are just an example of that. And you don't have to look at the details of this, but I do a lot of work myself with children of incarcerated parents. And I got into that particular area really from a parent who wrote us a letter who was in prison. It was a father, and basically said, I understand you're seeing my son, and I want to thank you, and I want you to know that I want to be involved. And frankly, I had never given that much thought. And it really stopped me in my tracks. And I had to look at, from a self-awareness point of view, my own implicit bias, like what did I assume when I heard that someone was incarcerated? What did I have to really slow down and think about? And really, we got pretty involved with this dad and his family and his child, and then had an opportunity to work with mothers in a community prison mother program. Those programs are all gone in California with realignment with AB 109. But when they were there, we got to really see a lot about what is it about corrections and is going on in corrections, and how corrections as a system doesn't really think about families or children. So this slide is just taken really, you can see this as an ACEs slide, and it's in here to let you see, just look at the color differences. The orange bars are basically when someone has checked that parental incarceration was one of the ACEs, something that was affected their family. And you can see all of these other things along this the bottom, the horizontal axis, that shows you all of the other co-occurring things that went along with having an incarcerated parent. So you can see the difference between the orange bars and the gray bars is that if you had an incarcerated parent, the number of co-occurring adverse experiences were really much higher than if there was no incarcerated parent. And so you can see when we look at this fulcrum that we're really weighting that negative outcome with these co-occurring factors, and what might we have to do to kind of put that back in balance. And this is another kind of version of really thinking of what that would look like, the effects of parental incarceration on young children. And you can just see all of the different places that that really affects parents that you might not think about. We might think about the trauma piece a lot in terms of, did a child witness parental arrest, and what is it like for them to have to visit their parent, or do they even know where their parent is? But I think all of the other things about the major life disruptions, those kids often bounce around, they get moved to different schools, they live with relatives or somewhere else, and even the family financial burden, which I don't think many of us are aware of, but when I did a deep dive into that, it's really pretty extraordinary what the criminal justice debt is that comes from parole, from probation, from court fees, from phone bills and visits. And so you can see that all of these things become a whole context of factors that can create, again, this kind of fulcrum. So we want to keep this fulcrum in our heads as we think about what those risk factors are and who we are and how we can move that fulcrum and kind of where it lists. So that's just kind of an example. Okay, let's take a moment and think about protective factors. And protective factors we think about as optimizing resilience. So we've mentioned some of these. We've mentioned a lot of these. We mentioned the personal characteristics, temperament. We've mentioned the developmental capacities of the child. We have not yet mentioned the core capabilities of parents, but I want to do that because, again, in those two-generation models idea, how do we support, by core capabilities, we're thinking of things about executive function, planning, capacity to be with your child, you know, to be able to organize yourself, to get a job, to kind of be places, to use the resources that are available in your community. I think we often work with parents who really don't have those core capabilities, and we make an assumption that they can organize, plan, and do things. Those are all executive functions, and we need to kind of take the perspective that executive functions are a skill that can be built. So we've got to think about that two-generation idea and how core capabilities in parents can be a protective factor. Secure and stable relationships, I think we're all after that, but it's not just relationships with caregivers. I always love that. There was a study done really many years ago by Emmy Werner in Hawaii, and she did a very longitudinal study following a cohort of young kids well into adulthood and looked at outcomes. And really the message from the study was what really mattered in terms of long-term outcome for children who had a lot of risk was whether they had a secure, stable relationship. And it didn't have to be with a caregiver. Like, it could be with a relative. It could be with a teacher. It's about somebody being really interested in you and available and caring. And that's what we're calling these kind of benevolent kind of experiences and creating that. So if that matters so much, it feels like all of us need to be devoted to really thinking about who is that relationship for that child and how do we all work to support it. Opportunities for learning, problem solving, and success. I think those of you who are in classrooms with kids really have an opportunity here, and you probably really see this. And this is where both developmentally and temperamentally and capacity-wise for children, how do we, you know, really create those opportunities for young children? I was at a conference a few weeks ago about floor time. Does anyone know about floor time for kids with autism? And it's a method of treatment for children on the autism spectrum. And the people presenting were from a school, a charter school that they come up with for kids with neurodevelopmental disorders. And what was so striking to me about it was that they would take something that you would see as a difficulty and they would turn it into a strength. So the example was, say, a child who was completely resistant to math, hated math, wouldn't sit down, wouldn't do the work, whatever, but loved cars. And so they created this whole thing for this child to be on the school property and chart which cars went by and turn it into a kind of a math exercise. How many Toyotas, how many of this brand, how many of that, and then very gradually kind of give him the opportunity to chart that, make it, do this. And then they had a video of him on a set of stairs learning to do things like he'd walk upstairs and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then he'd subtract 1 and he'd move down the stair. So he was really doing a body-based kind of building of that, and he learned to love math. And I was sitting there thinking, wouldn't it be fabulous to do that for every child? You know, if we could really slow down a little bit and create some of those opportunities for learning and problem solving for individual children who we know have sensory differences or neurodevelopmental differences, or bringing their anxiety and worries into our classrooms. And how would we do that? Coping strategies, again, some kids temperamentally can cope way better than others. And how do we really look at the individuality of a child and think about how might we help them manage taking their turn, dealing with disappointment, managing the really difficult situations in their lives? What can we do as a community of providers to really think about building coping strategies in children and giving them that opportunity, thinking of it as a protective strategy, again, in that fulcrum that really helps children. And then I want to mention benevolent experiences. We're going to come back to this as a screener, but I want to mention it because, as I said, I think we're better at risk than protection. And I want to make sure that we all walk out of here today, myself included, thinking about if we think that that certain relationships can be difficult or certain experiences can be damaging to children, do we have an equal set of benevolent experiences that we think can be really helpful and useful to children and to families? And I think we all know of some. Like, I don't know, can you think of some right now? Like, the first thing that came to my mind was the faith-based community, and how people who have faith or spirituality or something like that can really derive a great deal of satisfaction and benevolence from that, or helping them. What do you think when you think of benevolent experiences? What do you think of? Nature, that's a great one. And you guys live up in such a beautiful location, and yeah, I think nature's a really good example. Thank you for that. Yeah, anybody else? Write-ins too, we're talking to you in there.
Success or mastery of a skill in school.
Okay, mastery of something like that in terms of something that feels really good. It can be the simple thing of like, I learned to ride a bike or something like that. Yeah, that's really good. Somebody wrote something in here. What does it say? Wait, what did that say?
Said kind experiences with strangers or neighbors.
Okay, taking a real interest in that. Yeah, that kind of that way in which you have a community of kindness maybe around you, and have those. When I was thinking about that, I was just thinking, oh, how do you greet the baby in front of you at the grocery store? You know, is that a moment of a benevolent experience because that baby looks at you and you kind of light up, and there's a little moment there of benevolence, which might be really great. Anything else?
Yeah.
Oh wait, there's something up there. Kindness to themselves and self-esteem. Thank you for that. Oh,
Yes.
there's more.
And then based on individual
Based on individual experiences.
yes.
I think what's interesting in a way, culture, oh, thank you for that. Cultural practices and traditions, absolutely. I really appreciate that, Anna, from your group, because I want to bring culture way, way, way more into our conversation. And I think things like rituals, ceremonies, the things that we do to kind of create the cultural richness of our own heritage is really vital. I feel like we have a bit of a harder time coming up with these in a way than the risk factors, and I think I think it's interesting. It's a practice and a way of trying to do this. Anything else? What else?
I think I can think of a classroom-based one. So multi-age mingling.
Oh.
I guess I can use a personal experience. I have some older kids that come into my classroom and help set up for the day, and it just feels nice to know that they're having this very positive beginning to their day before they even go to their own classrooms. So
By coming into your classroom and helping.
Yes, I have very young children in my classroom.
But you're
these
saying
these fifth graders.
The fifth graders
come in
themselves
and help
are coming
set
in and
up.
having a really positive experience of helping.
And then they help me greet the children, and then they go off to their.
That's a really beautiful
day.
example, because you're creating even that welcoming. I think even that welcoming.
And they're needed. You know, it's a wonderful way to feel appreciative.
Yes.
You know, that they have this very important part in my day as a teacher.
Yeah.
And as the littles. So
It's a very beautiful parallel process kind of model, which feels great. Yeah, really good. So this graphic is borrowed from the Center for the Developing Child, and I like this too because I think that it reduces what we're talking about. It incorporates the idea of a two-generation model, and it kind of simplifies maybe some of our interventions into these three kind of bubbles that all have an outcome for healthy development in young kids and responsive caregiving. So again, supporting responsive relationships, how we all do that in everything that we do. Reducing sources of stress. We know that that's a huge issue in our communities and a challenge. And then the strengthening of core life skills. And again, I'll go back to that project we had with the redevelopment and job reentry in West Oakland, because really I come from a treatment program. So on the care continuum, I'm on the treatment end. And so this idea of how we partner, we don't have the capacity ourselves to do the strengthening the core life skills. We can support parents to do some of that, but it becomes really important for us, I think, to really look to partner with those organizations that really are doing that and not see that as totally separate from what we do. And that's the change that for me is to feel like if I'm going to support parents, if I'm on the supporting responsive relationships side, one way to do that is to think about this strengthening of core life skills of the parents that we're with. And we do a lot of support of that, doing things with parents to help them reach those goals. But again, when you're kind of funded in a stream that pays you to do this, it's really hard to reach over here. And I think that's where, as this community, as a learning community, as a regional community, it will be great to have everybody as think partners to think about how all of this in our individual silos and funding streams and whatever, if we have this kind of a group idea of where we fit on here and how we're interconnected, maybe that outcome of really creating healthier families is really where we're heading. So how do I know? How do I know what are risk and protective factors? So, I really thought about that, and we're gonna practice this a little bit in a moment. But this is what I think, that the reason we know things are risk or protective factors. One is that I observe it. So I observe it in my site, or I observe it in the home. I see it in front of me. I worry because I see a parent with no energy and low affect, because I arrive at a home where I'm really worried about the conditions of the home. I see the safety factor in the home, like, whoa, I'm worried a child will be injured here. There's steps, there's this, there's stuff everywhere. It feels, there's peeling paint, there's somebody's not noticing this. I observe it in the child. I feel like this child's not talking. They should be talking. So I see the interaction between a parent and a child, and I feel like, wow, this parent is really intrusive. And I see the child giving all these signals and the parent's not paying attention. So those are things that you observe, and then you have to internally have a place where you notice that, process that, and really can articulate, here's what I'm worried about, and here's why. Sometimes you know because you have records. So I get referral information when usually of a referral. Again, I'm a treatment program. So I get information, though I have to go digging into medical records to really find some of that. But I'm at a facility where I can do that. And so sometimes it comes in, somebody calls you on the phone, makes a referral, you read it on a referral form. Sometimes you get a screener. So I get ASQs from medical settings because they do an ASQ, or I'm in a Help Me Grow community. I don't know if you guys don't have Help Me Grow here. So Help Me Grow is a centralized referring for child development issues, and they might send an ASQ. So sometimes you have other things that you know from records. Schools may have information. And sometimes you know because you ask, because in order to open a case or for a parent to get services from you, you do some sort of an intake interview and have some sort of a conversation with parents. And the question is, what's on that form? And what kind of interview is that? And how do you know? And I put these up here because I'm wanting us for the moment to think about that information that comes at you and how you start to filter it in your mind as a protective or risk factors. Remember that fulcrum is now in your head. And as you listen and as you hear, what do you do with that information and how does it inform what you do? Does that make sense? So we're going to take some time. Am I at the right time now? I'm just about at the right time, I think. And I have given you all in your handouts a vignette, and it's called Thinking About Risk and Protective Factors. So everybody, and this is where I'm worrying about those of you at home, because I don't want to lose you if you're on your computer. I want you to read this because they have these handouts too, right?
You do. You can let them know that the handouts are all located online in the materials section.
Okay, online, the handouts. Okay, go ahead, Bryn.
So for our online audience, I hope you're following along. Under the materials section in Go-To Training, you should see that there are 8 handouts, and this vignette is listed on one of them, so you can read along with us.
I think this is handout number 2.
So this is handout number 2, so it should
and it's
start
called
with
Thinking About Risk and Protective Factors. So for those of us that are in groups, what you'll see here is a vignette that I kind of made up, and we're going to take some time and read the vignette, and then in our groups, either as a parent share, like in groups of 2 or 3, sit down and talk about these questions, meaning as you read this, so remember I just said you get the information in different ways, so I'm giving you this information in different ways. And then what would you identify as a risk and risk factor for the child and family? What do you identify as a protective factor? How does thinking about risk and protection help you figure out what to do next? And what would you suggest in this case? Okay, so we're going to do a little direct practice about risk and protection, okay? And we're going to reconvene as a group to check in on this in 15 minutes.
Yes. So this is, just to reiterate, this is an opportunity for networking in your site, wherever your location is, to really take a look at this vignette, talk about it. We're not going to have a real formal report out at the end of it, but you can write your comments into the chat as we've been doing so that we can share it around with everybody, the insights or the results of your networking and discussing this together in your site. And we have about 20 minutes to be able to look at this.
Yeah, so let's do it. We have about, I don't know, 10 or 12 people in the room, maybe 10. Let's do it maybe in groups of 4, which might be easier than doing it all as one group. And you all come from different places. So read the vignette, talk about the questions, and then we'll do a little bit of pulling of information out of people in about 20 minutes, 15 or 20 minutes. We'll see where it goes. And those of you at home, again, write it in as it comes up. Interesting ideas, things you're thinking about. We want to be able to kind of get that from everybody. You want to do groups of 3?
We'll just put it on 2 groups of 3 and we'll do the 4 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. We'll be back in 20 minutes. Okay. Wait, so if I turn this, let me turn this off so I'm not talking at everybody.
Hello, everyone. Just letting you know that it's time to wrap up the discussion about the vignette. Certainly in this room where we can hear what's happening, there's been a lot of conversation, and I hope there's been a lot of conversation in your other sites as well. So feel free to write in a comment in the chat area from your community about maybe some things that came up, and we'll read those. We'll read those back to the full group once we start seeing them come into the box from your community. Thank you.
Toby LeBrand. Find her, Toby. Okay, I'm hoping that in our sites, we're coming back together now. We're coming back together here in Humboldt County. We're trying. So, so let's kind of do just a mini report out of what we learned. What happened in your conversations? So we'll start here in Humboldt, and then we'll read to you what people have written in. And I want to thank Lily and Toby, particularly at their computers, who were writing in, and we were having a bit of a conversation, which was really fantastic. So where did the conversation go here? Oh, come on.
Well, do you want to start at like the number one?
Just whatever you think. Just pull out the interesting things that you think happened in the conversation.
Yeah, I think just noticing that even though there's all those risk factors that, most people I'm sure identified with the domestic violence and methamphetamine and abandonment of a parent and all those things, there's also a lot of real positive protective factors that, the child's interested in academics and the mother is engaged to come pick him up and to advocate for him with teachers, and that they now have stable housing. It seems like there's a lot of positive things to work with if there's someone who's able to support them.
Yeah,
working on this.
Great.
Yeah.
Anybody else in terms of stuff and things that came up in the conversation? I like that we could identify protective factors and intersperse, and you can see how they always are really interspersed with risk factors. And yeah. Connie.
We talked a little bit about wanting to maybe observe him in the classroom and maybe even in the home, and also about what kind of supports can really be put into the school, because stability seems like an important thing for him, and moving him again, it sounds like he's had a lot of moves. So is there a way to bring in supports maybe from the community or whatever so that he could actually stay in that classroom and be successful? I mean, if the school, sounds like maybe the school's given up on him, but we'll,
And you can really empathize in a way with the teacher's challenge, in a sense, with a child who runs out of the, whatever. So that notion of we can't support this child in this kind of classroom, and you're bringing up the issue is there something as a community that we could do to support teachers to keep children like that in their classrooms? Is there mental health consultation? Is there some other kind of support? So that notion, particularly bringing up, do we really want this child to have another move, or can we make that stability of relationship piece a priority? Yeah. Anything else come up? Yeah.
So I think that some of the stuff we were talking about was just how many more questions it brings up when you read a vignette, and just kind of wondering like how many moves has he had, and did all those moves include school moves? How far away is he from where he was originally, or where grandma's house was, or and what are the supports for mom outside of our teachers or staff that she's talked to? Also that she had asked for help from the pediatrician, and so some of our conversation was what are supports that could be offered when there's no immediate response available for what she's asked for. And and then it kind of went back to how do we go with what she's identified as an issue, and sleep was an issue. And so we were talking about, can we kind of enter into a partnership there where she feels more supported, and maybe there's an impact on behaviors because of what might help with what sleep problems or.
Did you have an answer to that question of what do we do if there aren't the resources she's asking for?
Well, we kind of just started, we started
pull an answer?
brainstorming, but it ended up more questions like, how well does she know the area she lives in? Does she already have connections to Family Resource on our Parks and Rec? What is the financial situation? Where can they just go out to the beach or on, more of the nature and spend time one-on-one together? But then also adult contact for mom and play groups, or I don't know. So it was just kind of a, how much does she already have awareness of and has tried, and how much does it feel like we're just like throwing stuff at her to give her things, that.
Yeah, exactly. I love both of those points. I mean, first of all, what I appreciate is going with not what we don't have, but what do we have. I like that, because we're not going to solve that we don't have this problem overnight. So what do we have? And then I think your question of sometimes with a notice and refer, you feel like it feels like hot potato to me. Like, I gave somebody a resource, okay, there. But really, the question is, can they access that resource? Can they get there? Does that involve a little more of a warm handoff or more involvement? So that was great. I've seen some things percolate over here. Should we listen to what came up in some of the other conversations?
Yes, we definitely want to hear from the other sites.
Yes, we've had a lot of online engagement and some responses from our remote sites. So I will read you what we have. Lily says, I think making sure housing remains stable is the #1 priority. Without that, everything else will be more difficult. The factor that the mom has been unable to get her child in our counseling is common. It's great that we are doing more screenings and are more trauma-informed, but without adequate resources, what would we do with this information? In this vignette, it sounds like the mom is in stable housing, but without a job, it won't be there long, and she won't be able to hold down a job if she has to pick her kid up from school early. Then we have Toby says, assess preschool classrooms, environments, and coaching for the preschool teacher. Then we have Nicole.
So that's what you were bringing up, Connie, too. Like, how do we help the teacher in a way? Yeah.
And then, so Nicole for #1, hiding, anxiety, aggression, depression, single parent, DV witness, LEO call, no stability, several moves, sleep deprived, only biracial student in class.
So all the risk factors.
Yeah. Substance use with father, temperament, hyperactivity, older sibling, singled out as a problem child, mom thought.
Lots of risk factors. Yeah.
#2, stable home currently.
Protective factors. I'm hearing.
Advocacy, mom. Abused, moved out. One-on-one with teachers and mom. Interest in learning. Grandparents and others. School interventions. Seeking medical care and older sibling.
Okay, so they really broke it out. MODOC really said, here are the risk factors, here are the protective factors. They're following the questions, yeah. But they did a really nice job of all those protective factors, because remember when I said, like, what do you see, what do you hear, what do you inform? They're really pulling that out of that in terms of really noticing that parents, the capacities in the child and the parent, yeah.
Alicia also says the child's lack of sleep is also a risk factor in mental illness. Anna says, obviously Luke has had his share of trauma with many ACEs in his young life. Removing him from school would be detrimental, adding another risk factor. She also says, engaging outside behavior support agencies or possible assessments to regional centers. And then Nicole for #4 has said counseling, family single, peer programs like Big Brother, cultural competency, job skills for the mom, life skills, crisis center and parenting, other school options, and classroom adaptations. Then we have Staff needs PD/training to be able to help Luke regulate his behavior, giving him tasks to help him keep busy, establish different routines for Luke to help his regulation and behavior management.
Okay, so there's in-classroom stuff and really working with teachers. It's so hard to get teachers to trainings, isn't it? Can we figure that out?
And the
I
last,
really empathize with them. They have such a hard job.
yeah, and then the last one is also from Anna saying, help mom identify her own strengths to figure out how to draw on them for support.
Okay, so it sounds to me, this is so great because we're hearing what people are thinking about all over. It sounds like we're really good at picking up on the risk factors and the protective factors. We know what we'd like to do. And the question of how to implement what we'd like to do is where we have a problem. Did something else come in?
Can you just move your microphone?
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and really as a community, oh, thanks, Nicole. Keep me on my toes, that's good. As a community, I feel like that's gonna be the big challenge, is that it's not that we don't know what we'd like to do. The question is, how do we implement it? If we don't have the resources, or like, when do we just stop, refer, if they can't use that? Like, how are we gonna work on that as a community? That could be something that we need to work on as a community, and we probably need that model for not only our region, but for rural communities in general. So it would be fantastic if, as a region, we took that on, because it comes up over and over and over again. And I asked Lily when she wrote about that, is the problem, how much of the problem is, say, gatekeeping? I can't use the resource because I'm just over the income line, or it's too far away for me to get there, or how much of it is I don't have the organizational skills to follow through on that by myself, or how much of it is something else. So maybe we need to figure out what the resources are that are available, go with that, what is available, and then a segmented approach of how do we do a better job of helping people access what is here while we work on the gaps. I don't know. Well, that was really great, and I'm really happy that everybody participated in the way that they did. So let's take a breath and move to thinking about screening a little bit. So in a way, risk and protective factors overlap a little bit, and this handout number, I think it's 3 for those of you at home. The red flags for social and emotional development of children to age 5 kind of break down this into more symptoms. And again, this is just, here's a guide. We're not going to go through this, but what I like about it is that it does take a developmental approach, because what we really want to be thinking about is, how do symptoms of distress present themselves developmentally? So for instance, what we see in a neonate, or in the first 3 months, is really going to be about regulatory problems with sleep and eating and system regulation, because that's the developmental task of those first 3 months. But what we see in older children, and what I commonly see, I don't think I ever see a child who doesn't have a speech delay, for instance. So the question is, what's that all about? And how do we start seeing behavior as a form of communication, and what does it look like in various ages, and when should we, where's our line of when to worry and figure it out? So that's the handout for you to really think about. But what I want to do is talk a little bit about screening, because I feel like screening is embedded in all of the silos and systems and funding streams that we have. So if you're part of a system of any sort, you probably have to screen. How many of you do screening? Oh, not all of you do. Wow. Okay, I don't know what out there or what happened in there, but let's take a look at this next slide, which screening is. And I want you to think about this. I'm going to force you to a numbering system to prioritize these. And there are 5 statements on here about screening, and I want you to number them 1 through 5 in order of the priority that you think of screening. Screening is, so number 1 would be what you think the most important reason that screening should be done, down to 5, the least important. So I'm going to give everybody a minute. This is all of you out there in all of your remote sites and those of you online, is to please do this kind of screening thing. 1 through 5. 1 is the most important, 5 is the least important. Those of you at home on your computers, if you could send Madison your number 1 and number 2. So rank it as number 1 is this, number 2 is that, and let's just see where people fall. So I'm going to give you a minute. And really, screening is all of these things. So we know that there isn't a kind of right or wrong here. Screening is really all of these things. But what we really want to think about is how do you think about what screening is and in what way it would be useful. Okay, so what do we have as number 1s? Let's hear what we did here on our host site. What was number 1? Connie? Opening a conversation. How many people said that was it? Okay, so here I'm seeing, wait, keep your hands up so I can count you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 8 people in Humboldt that said an opening to a conversation was number 1. And I don't know, Nicole, are you listening out there in Modoc? How many people? What did you say? What was number 1? What was the common answer there? Can you hear me? A way to estimate, 4 people, a way to estimate how serious a problem might be. Okay. What was number 2 for people here? Number 2?
Triage too.
Wait, what was it?
A way to triage and begin to help.
A way to triage? How many people did that as number 2? Oh, we have a little more continuity. Okay, Beth, what was your number 1?
What was my number 1? I was struggling with my number 1.
Which one?
I was struggling with number
struggling.
1.
I see.
I think a way to help find out what who needs a particular type of help or services was my
Okay,
number
wait,
1.
find out a particular. Okay, great. Okay, Lake County. Is that Anna? Is she in Lake? Anna, what's your number 1? Oh, wait, here's somebody writing in. Find out who needs a particular kind of help or services. Okay.
One is, what is she asking?
Okay, excuse me, which one was our number 1?
It would open a
Opening to
conversation.
conversation.
How many?
Can you hear us?
Yeah, we're here. What was the most votes for number 1?
I think there was 5. There's 9 of us here.
Okay. And what was the statement? Which one was most popular?
Opening. Sorry.
I think that's okay. Well, I mean, I think the point is that, and people, if you want to keep writing in, that's fine. We'll read them out. I think it's interesting. All of these things are things that a screening accomplishes. And I think depending on who you are and where you are, you might do it in different ways or want it in other ways. But it's interesting how many people are interested in it as an opening to a conversation. I often see screens done in a way where it's not clear there are even 2 people in the room doing it. Like you can think of a screening that you do where the receptionist or something hands you the screen and you hand it back in and you don't even know who scores it. Or medical screening. We've probably all had some version of a medical screen where you just get a prescription and you go do it, whatever, and you get a postcard in the mail or something. So the question in some ways is when it is a conversation, and since we're in a relational world, or that's what we're trying to create, I think we want to think about screening more in that way. So here are some examples of the screening tools that I think are kind of required if you're in certain systems. So like oh, I'm doing it again. I'm so sorry. Thank you. Can you hear me now? So ASQ and ASQ-SE are popular. I think they're being required in early Head Start and Head Start in development. In the place where I live, pediatrics also does ASQs. The DECA is a symptom screener. The regional centers in California are required in the past year to choose a social emotional screen. That's new. And each county is able to choose what they want to use. My county has chosen the DACY too, but North Coast Regional Center chose the DECA. And I think they're having trouble with that. The DECA is part screener, part assessment. And the medical community, the Medi-Cal mental health community is required to do the PSC 35. So that's the pediatric symptom checklist. And what's interesting is they're only requiring that, at least where I am, for kids over 4, because this version of it doesn't go down, but there is a version that goes down below that age, but they're not requiring that. So there's our little kids being left out a little bit. The healthcare people are using the PHQ-9 or the PHQ-2. That's a symptom of depression and other kind of health-related issues. Public health uses the Edinburgh often, which is a depression screen. And pediatrics is the APA, American Academy, AAP, American Academy of Pediatrics, tells pediatricians to screen for autism at 18 months using the MCHAT. So these are examples of tools that are embedded into systems that get reimbursed and also that require it. And so screening is seen as a surveillance tool. So the idea is that we do everybody. It's a universal approach. We know that we're going to have some difficulties. We'll end up with some false positive kids that screen in that really don't have that condition. And still, it's a kind of surveillance and monitoring kind of tool that's easily done. So it's common screening. So I want to talk about how we would do a screener. And a lot of people here are not doing screeners, which is interesting, but let's talk about what you would do if you did a screener. So I think to make this relational, since most of you said a screener should be about a conversation, the opening of it, here's the beginning of a conversation. So if I were going to do the screener, I might say to the family, I might tell them something about what the screener is for. How might I choose my words to talk about what the screening is for in a way that they would understand? So this is a screener about your child's development. It's going to ask you certain questions that we see are common in children of certain ages. This helps us know if your child is kind of on track and helps us see where your child may or may not need extra support, whatever you kind of think about the kind of screening you're doing. So you might want to be interested to know if it's a valid screener, meaning does it statistically hold up in terms of identifying what the screener is designed to identify. That's what the metrics are really about screeners, is a way to figure out if they have the specificity and the sensitivity to really get you what you're after, the question that you're after. So you might want to say to somebody, this is a screener that's been used on, kids between this age and this age. Whether your screener has cultural validity and has been used on a wide variety of children, or whether it doesn't have that specificity, to me is an important part of that conversation, and that may come up. You want to know how to score the screener and whether you're going to do that, and how to explain the scoring of that to parents and the limitations of that scoring, because screening is not a diagnosis. Screening is a surveillance tool that is in that direction of telling you, should I be worried? Compared to children of this age, this child looks a little behind. And so let's take another look. Let's wait 6 months and look again. Let's say what this means, but it isn't the answer and it's not a full assessment. So you have to really know that that's specific. And then here's the big question we're coming up with: what kinds of referrals are available if there are concerns that need to be addressed? So again, lots and lots of people say, why would I screen if there's no place to refer? And I want to keep that question hovering in the air, because I feel like as a community, we want to really think about it. Is that a good reason not to screen? I don't know, maybe. Do we have a way that we can address something if it comes up? Do we want to be a monitoring community so that we know that there are problems and we at least can monitor those problems? So I don't know. Let's keep that kind of available. Okay, so here again is just a slow down moment about how you would prepare for the screen and engage and connect with parents about doing, again, our goal is to do everything relationally. So is it confidential? Because I think that's something that we don't really think a lot about. So if you're screening for depression or you're screening for something like that, I think you would want to really say, this is a screen that is asking about this, and this information is confidential. If we want to make a referral, you're the holder of that privilege, and we will ask you first and get your permission to try and find the right services. And so I don't know how often we think about that, but we should be reassuring people about the confidentiality of that. And then explain that you're going to share the results with somebody. When we did this screen, we found that you had concerns about your child's behavior. We can think together about that and consider some steps we can take to help improve that. So what is going to happen with the information we get from screening? So again, I think some sites do a massive screen or an online screen, and I think you don't get this relational approach. You don't really know the answers to those questions and things. And again, if you want, we could refer you to whatever, a home visiting program, a play group, a regional center, so you get more support. How does that sound to you? So again, remember those initial things we talked about as trying to partner with parents and be relational. These are all kind of slowing down.
We have an online comment.
Okay.
Lily has said, we want to keep in mind that screening can sometimes re-traumatize the person. If we are going to screen, the screener should have training to be able to deal with the answers and have resources available if it causes trauma.
Thank you so much for, I'm sorry, who was that? Lydia? Oh, Lily. Oh, Lily, thank you. Yeah, that's going to be particularly important as we start talking about ACEs. And I think you're talking about kind of what the content is and also how it's done. So I appreciate that comment in terms of really thinking of a relational model of screening and being thoughtful about what the screen is really about. Did you have a question?
I just had to go back to the whole.
Sorry. Yeah.
Back to the whole thing of going back to the thing of why do you screen if you don't necessarily have someone to refer to? And to me, I think it's why a lot of the people across the board were using opening the conversation. And some of the examples you were giving of, yeah, you're just going into an office, you're getting this form, you're filling it out, you're handing it back, you never see the person. But if we're working towards like building relationships and going to that whole diagram of the flyer, trust being the central theme of building relationships,
yeah, the word cloud.
It's a conversation that you're creating an opportunity for conversation and an opportunity to continue to work with this family and offer what supports you can. And even though all the supports that you might want aren't available, you're doing education, and through offering this, you're creating an opportunity for education. And just through that education, there's going to be other supports that come out of that conversation. So just that it is important, if you have that opportunity where you're working longer term with a family, to do the screening, even if you don't have all the resources that you would like.
I think you're also making a comment, but correct me if I'm not hearing this correctly, that there's screening like measures that we learn about or know about, and then there's the conversation about the same content, which doesn't have to be on an official screen, but comes out as part of a relationship and a conversation, and could be as simple as, do you have any concerns about your child's behavior?
Yeah.
And it's a conversation.
Yeah.
So you're saying that screening in a more informal way can be embedded in all the conversations that we have with parents.
Right. I mean, my only experience with it is just doing the ASQs.
Okay.
But I've found that it creates an opportunity for focused time with the family where they're talking about their children and other things come up, and any other concerns they might have. And it's building a relationship.
Because you're doing the ASQ relationally with the parent and child.
Yeah.
Which is different than how some people do the ASQ, which is just here, fill this out.
Right. Sometimes the parent does fill it out, but when we're doing the scoring, we do it together, even if they fill it out alone.
Okay, and I'm hearing that that's really preferred. Again, that relational context of doing it. And I'm also hearing that there are drops of developmental guidance that can be embedded in that kind of screen. So that's a kind of screening as assessment. It's kind of an intervention. Screening can be its own supportive intervention of families.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to that.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Oh, great. Okay. Great. Let's hear what the
So, Nicole, they said MODOK share. We may not know, but our coworkers / other professionals do or have the tools. And then Anna says, are we going to talk about the Benevolent Childhood Experiences screener and how is it used?
Yes and yes. So we'll move on and talk about some of that. Okay, so let's kind of move on for a minute. So we're gonna get there in a second. So here's an example of a screener. So I could say to you, we just made this up, this screener. But just by way of thinking about that, this is a screener that I'd like to tell you about. It's about thinking about your own wellness and whether you have a kind of wellness practice. That's about taking a moment in your day. We know from the mindfulness literature that finding strategies of self-regulation and mindfulness and attention can really be helpful in terms of calming and regulating and really a protective factor for our own health. So this is just looking at whether you have anything like this kind of built into, and we're not going to share this with anybody. This is for your own benefit to use this screener and just as a way of thinking about that. But if you want to talk later about mindfulness practices or other ways of thinking about this, this is an entry point into that. So let's all take the screener. So this is me introducing to you kind of what it's for and making sure you understand that I'm not going to use it in any way that is going to be shared with anybody else, and giving you a little drop of psychoeducation about mindfulness and wellness practices. And then I would say to you, okay, let's all just do this. So it's a 2-question screen. It's scored in this way. There's numbers there and you add up your numbers, and then we have a little bit of piece of advice there for you. If you scored a 4, it sounds like you have a pause wellness practice, and good for you. Continue to do that. If you scored a 3, it sounds like you're on your way. And so we've kind of made up a little scale here. I took it and I was 0 to 2. And I was like, oh, this was a useful exercise for me. But even when I did that, knowing I was kind of using this today, I thought I kind of learned something about myself, meaning I guess I need to think about, if I believe in wellness, a pause moments and that kind of thing, I should really stop and think about that. So even as a little surveillance tool and a little exercise, there is a way in which screening can be a kind of education. So this was just a fun little moment. Okay, and then just when we do screen, here's the referral piece. So do we have parents who understand the referral? We talked about this a little bit here in our Humboldt group, but how do we engage parents in thinking about whether the referral is useful to them, how they can access it, do they need assistance, can we do that, and are we checking back actually with people to see if those referrals really take hold, or are we all just kind of, I always think of that, what's that game, hot potato, here, you, I'm sending it off to this person, I'm sending it off to that person. And again, in my community where a lot centers around the medical home and pediatrics, I think it happens like that a lot. It's like, okay, boom, we're referring you here and here. And they have a big practice, and following up on that can be really challenging from them. And so I've taken it on as a treatment program. I feel like part of what I do is reconnect with the pediatrician and say, got it. Okay, there's the hot potato. I got your referral. Here's what's happening. I met with the family. We've got it. And really just connecting that web around the family and seeing if that exists. Okay, so here's the additional screeners we're going to do a little talking about today, and I just want to make you familiar with these. And this is not an endorsement of let's do this, but I think these are all interesting examples of screeners. They all are what I call open source screeners, meaning you don't pay for them. And I think that's an important consideration. And I just want you to be familiar with them in case you are interested in a screening, or just as we continue this kind of conversation. And you have copies in your handouts of all of those, except those of you remotely. Oh, shoot. Those of you remotely, and even the people here, do not have a copy of the CPP symptom screener because I left it back in my suitcase. Okay, so the SWIC is the Survey of Wellbeing of Young Children. You have copies of this, is developmental. You have two versions. I copied two versions for you, the 18-month and the 36-month versions. And what you can see from the SWIC is that it's designed here to really combine like three different contexts, one being a developmental one. So what they did to develop the SWIC is that they reviewed like 300 questions from all these different screeners, and they put an assortment of them together. So there are a set of development questions that are aimed at looking at milestones and also at parents' observations of social interaction, which is kind of a little mini surveil for autism. There's the pediatric symptom checklist, and on this particular, the SWIC, if you look at like the 18, let's see, month, well, they have the same ones. There is a baby pediatric symptom checklist and a preschool version. So they have them that goes actually all the way down to neonates. So they have the symptom checklist that is looking at like behaviors. And then if you go to the back, you'll see that there's the parent observations of social interactions, and then some questions about the parents' concerns. The family context section of this includes family questions. So you can see they're asking for the parents' concerns. They're looking at the parents' observations of the child. They are asking questions that are related to family context and what we might consider to be social determinants of health, about drugs and alcohol, about food insecurity, about parental depression, and about relationships amongst partners. So it's screening really for something like argument or even DV. And then there's the talk, read, sing, reading question at the end. So you can see that with the SWIC, and this is open source, and you can find the manual and all of the different developmental age groups online, looking up the SWIC, and this is all at this floating hospital for Tufts. We have a question?
Hi, yes, we have a question from Jennifer. Is the SWIC evidence-based?
Yes, the SWIC actually is, I don't know if they're considered evidence-based or they're a promising practice or on their way to being that, but you can find all of their metrics on their website. And they were used a lot, I think, in the Project Launch projects that were SAMHSA funded. And it's an interesting model. I mean, I've never used the SWIC, I will say that, but I like a little bit what they're doing and trying to put all of this together. I like very much that they're open source. And yes, they are on their way to evidence-based because they're based, most of the questions are based on screeners that are evidence-based. So they've done a kind of look at those questions. Okay, so let me go back here and say a little bit about the pearls. That is also in your handout. The pediatric ACEs and related life event screeners. I've added the pearls to you. This should be double-sided. You should see part one of the pearls is what we think of as the ACEs. The pearls is the measure that was put together by Nadine Burke-Harris, who is now our current Surgeon General. It was validated through a study at Children's Hospital where I am. And now that Nadine Burke-Harris is our Surgeon General, she has really helped to promote, and what's coming down the pike rapidly is that starting January 1st, there is funding for medical providers to be reimbursed for screening for ACEs and the pediatric version of the pearls. So health providers will be able to bill, there's a billing code for using the pearls, and will be reimbursed $29 a screen. And if they do a 2-hour online training, they will be able to use the billing code. There's also a lot of money that will be in that package for training, which will be segmented training. So to do the 2-hour webinar, you'll be able to use the screen in your clinic and reimburse it. But nobody thinks that a 2-hour training to do ACEs is really sufficient. And there's going to be a lot more kind of slow down training for really thinking about it, which is really addressing the question that we had about, can screeners be re-traumatizing to people? And certainly when it comes to asking these kinds of questions, I think that's really, really an important conversation to have. how do we start by really connecting with this information and thinking about what it means to ask these questions. And I think Nadine Burke-Harris's intent, which I support, is that the information about toxic stress and the impact of adverse child experiences on long-term health outcomes is information that all of us and parents deserve to have. Meaning it's not just that we're screening, but the information about the psychoeducation and health education part about what we're learning about how stress starts to live in the body, how trauma lives in the body, and what that really does to long-term health outcomes is something that we can't be doing to people. We have to be doing it with people to help them understand the impact of that. So I think this is an attempt to be partnered with a kind of educational piece that's about trauma. And you'll notice that the addition of this from the ACEs is part 2, which is the social determinants of health piece, which is about community violence, discrimination, housing, food insecurity, separation, immigration kind of issues, and really the loss or death of a parent. So I think the other thing about PEARLS, which is an expansion of ACEs, ACEs is retrospective, adults looking back on child experiences. The PEARLS is let's talk now with parents about the situations of children and let's add these social determinants of health. So that's coming up very quickly, currently to be rolled out in the medical community, but the question is, in our communities, is this something that we would want to use in other systems as well, and how we think about it? Okay, here is the benevolent childhood experiences. I include this in here. Oh, that's very hard to read, so I'm glad you have a copy of it. So this was developed by, the authors are listed there. It's coming out of the Child Trauma Research Program at UCSF. And, you know, they are a treatment program. They do child-parent psychotherapy with children who have experiences of trauma. So they are a mental health treatment program. And they talk a lot about treating trauma and protective factors. And I love what they did here. They designed this benevolent child experiences measure. The way they refer to it is ghosts and angels. And they do a lot of talk about angel moments, like in those benevolent experiences. And so what you're seeing here is a non-validated measure. This is not evidence-based. It is not validated. And I've included it here not so much for people to use, but I think if you want to use it, that would be interesting, but to remind us all that we're not asking enough about this side of the fulcrum. So here's their version of the set of questions that they came up with, and they do this in all of their assessments. They do a whole lot of measures when they open a case, and this is one. Okay, and they are asking people about these benevolent experiences. So not just about, they do a lot of trauma screening about the history of trauma screening of the child, they do trauma screening of the parent, but they also do this benevolent screening about these questions. So I think that they're very interesting in terms of really helping people. And the way they do about it, I took the metrics off of here. What they do is they ask the question, they ask about the age when that happened, and they begin to ask a little about the impact that had on people. So I think part of what's happening when you ask questions like this, and if we engage in screening as important as a conversation, is that you're also helping people to remember and access those moments, those angel moments of benevolence, and really help remind people of some of those things too. So, yeah.
With the ACEs, the PEARLS, or whichever ACEs questionnaire,
doing the resiliency questionnaire so that it's paired, so that, because I feel like even with the PEARLS, you kind of get to the bottom and you have the score and you wonder what now.
Exactly.
And I think that if you could compare that immediately to the resiliency piece, whether it's as an individual doing it themselves or a provider screening at the same time, but to see like this doesn't just have to be the trauma and the ACEs,
Exactly.
it can
Yes,
be the resiliency piece.
Yes. And I think that is an important thing of how we put that all together.
Barbara, she just triggered a thought. Sometimes we
don't think we have the right resource for the family, but she just is reminding me of the fact that when you ask these kinds of questions, you're tapping into a kind of resource
Yes.
for the person,
Yes.
internal resources that they
Absolutely.
have. And so even though you might not be able to get them to something that you think would be the perfect match for the issue they're having, tapping into these things might actually be more significant in the long run. And as you've said, we don't do that very much. So
Yes.
really looking into this, I think, has a whole element of wisdom that we don't necessarily apply.
I think the trauma world has moved the conversation from it's not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you. But I think there's another part of the conversation. It's not just what happened to you, it's how you make meaning of what happened to you. And you're saying it's not just what happened to you and how you make meaning of that, but it's the whole package of what happened to you and some of that. And so I think what you're all leaning into is the narrative that we create about our lives and who we are is maybe one of the biggest protective factors or risk factors. And maybe that's a way to think about it because that's something we can do. We can help people with that narrative. And that's really what I heard you say, that if we do both of those scores, we're helping to create a picture for you that's a more complete whole picture. And maybe it's really how your story lives in your mind is a big shaper of what happens.
Well, and I think as a provider, not seeing it as a, like,
I think as a provider, not having to know the score, because when the ACEs questionnaire first came out, it was like, we all need to know
Yeah.
what everyone's dealing with or what their number is. And I feel like it would be more important to know the other score
Yeah.
and that we
like
don't
that.
really need to know a number for ACEs. We just need to assume everybody has them and we're all gonna work on the other side.
I like that. Yeah. So here's the CPP symptom screener. You don't have that in your handouts. I didn't bring it to the people here, but here it is. I apologize for that. But again, this is the child parent psychotherapy people. They've put together this screener, not validated. This is something they made up. So really but what you can see on here, if you can see this slide, is really the list of common the way that young children show us that they're having difficulties, and they keep evolving this. Now they have a bit of a rating scale with it, like is it a 1, 2, or a 3? But you can really see that some of these issues are symptoms with body functions. Some are about development or developmental delays, sensory issues, health problems, and emotional difficulties, challenging behaviors, relationship, and other responses. And it's interesting in terms of that long-term health outcome. Again, I don't think I ever see a child in my setting that does not have asthma and eczema, like really. And I don't think that's just an environmental, like it's the air. I think that this is the way young children are starting to show us with their bodies of what toxic stress maybe looks like at a young age. And so for me in particular, where I am, those health things are really interesting. I'm like eczema, reflux, asthma, other GI stuff. I feel like I see that a lot. So anyway, these are all meant to be, I'm mindful of time, and I'm gonna kind of wrap up. So so those are all just screeners that are out there that I wanted you to be aware of as part of this conversation. This is our barriers. We know about this. We've got to train, time, reimbursement cost. Is a family going to actually give you information? Okay, working with incarcerated parents. Okay, they don't trust the system. And they certainly don't want to tell you anything about their children because of their fear that you'll go take their children. And so that's a good example of lack of disclosure. And we've raised the limited access to services and resources here a lot. And then the cultural factor is the tool itself, or how you have the conversation. Is it culturally compatible or is it insensitive? So here we are at our next kind of talk to each other moment, and look at these questions on your screen and not at the ones that are in your handout, because we did a little bait and switch this morning and changed these up a little bit. But here's what we want to talk about now in our respective locations, and that we'll come back and check in on. So Are there screeners and or screening practices, I can hear them already coming up, that you think would be useful to promote in our community of service providers? You know, what could we be doing or should we be doing that would be really beneficial, again, to this long-term creating a early childhood mental health community of practice and supporting social emotional well-being in young children? How might that work? And then I want to remind you of the word cloud, which is here, and we'll put it up as soon as you make sure you have these questions. How might you incorporate words from the word cloud in your screening practices? So this word cloud came from you. It came out of our first session when we kind of the takeaways from that first session. So we're trying to keep that active. So we need like a split screen, Bryn, so we can have the questions and the word cloud up at the same time. Because I'm a little worried. The people in our room have the word cloud copied, but I don't know if that's true. Everybody has it copied?
Everyone should have a copy, and it's been uploaded.
Okay, perfect. So we'll leave this on the questions then. So we're going to break up for about 15 minutes, maybe 10, maybe a little less. And let's have a screening conversation that really interfaces with our word cloud, and let's see what we can come up with as a region. Okay? Go.
All of is Mendocino County has that services.
Okay.
So I'd like really long data on each for the community, then it's kind of like, you just pediatrics, personal.
Okay, we're coming back together. We're gonna come, I was at a conference yesterday that did this. This is at the preschool way. They did it as a stretch, like a mutual stretch. Oh, see, we've got people back here and remotely, we're hoping you're coming back together. One of your handouts, this is for all of you, one of your handouts by the end of today that I would like you to fill out is the one that says Training Action Plan. For those of you at home, this is handout number 8. And if you are willing to put your name and email on there, and before you leave here today, really mention what is something that you can do tomorrow as a result of what you participated in today, what's something your program or agency can do differently, and what additional support do you need. That's something that my program will use, be in touch with you, and be back to you as a learning community about. We want to support you to do some of those things. But right now we're going to check in on this conversation. So let's go back to the questions and so Susan is going to write down, this is where we become a community. And Strategies has this ambitious, interesting methodology and goal where we put some ideas out into the room, and then we collect ideas back from you as a region and really think about how we might change. And so this is the part where we really try and collect your ideas as a result of these conversations and put that together in a way that comes back to us as a learning community and as a set of ideas to really implement. We're really looking for a systems change here. So what came out, let's start here in Humboldt. We'll start in Humboldt and how did you guys address these 2 questions? Are there screeners and or screening practices that you think would be useful to promote in our community of service providers? What happened? What came up?
More strength-based training.
More strength-based?
Yeah, just.
Can you say something more about that? Meaning, how are we not strength-based? What do we need to do more of?
Basically more like the benevolent experiences screening and things that, thank you, point out strengths and empower families.
Okay.
And as opposed to pointing out things that are going wrong for the family.
Okay. Anything else? Other conversations that came out of this?
Focusing, just building on that, just sort of like focusing on their areas of expertise that they already have and identifying those and like what resources they already have. And through
which they are you talking
whatever families that you're working with.
Okay.
And it feels like with the ACEs in particular and some of the other screening tools that are available, it's more focusing on what areas are you weak in or what previous negative experiences have you had and how are they negatively affecting you now, and sort of just approaching it from sort of the opposite end of the spectrum.
What else?
We talked about using with the screeners that we're already using, making sure that we're doing some really mindful teaching about how to incorporate the screenings and how to use some of the things that we talked about and use our word cloud to talk about how to do a screening well, to make it an ongoing conversation with a family.
What screenings are you already using?
So we're using ASQ, ASQSE, they're using the CANs and
The pediatric symptom checklist.
And the PS.
Yeah.
And then you had one more CB.
We do CBCL for Theraplay and the MIM, which
Which one?
MIM is I don't know what it is.
So you're going over here into assessment a little bit. From
a little bit. Yeah.
More general.
MIM. Oh, yeah. CBCL. Yeah.
Is that a screener or an assessment tool?
It's kind of an assessment tool. I think it's more of an observation of parents and kids together.
I don't know that tool either. Do you know what it stands for?
I can look it up.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll echo from our group that we didn't say we said some of the strength-based tools, but really not so much the tool, but how you use it, and to be able to work with the family to use it as a tool for their own understanding, and not that they're getting evaluated by us.
So less do to people and do with people to collaborate in the understanding and get some of that, maybe drop and explore methodology of information too. Susan and I had an interesting conversation about one question: what brings you joy in your life? And what would happen if we started thinking about that as a question about the parent? What gives you joy, and what gives your child joy in their lives? What gives you joy in your relationship with your child? What gives you joy in your community? And I was thinking about your nature kind of, and how interesting it would be to just be asking those kinds of questions across those 4 areas: child, parent, relationship, community. That's not a validated tool either, but in terms of creating how do you create the narrative of your life? Yeah, we had a comment. We had a, yeah.
So I think part of our conversation was also as far as the screening practices and what would be useful to promote amongst providers, I think, is being mindful of what you're asking people about and how you respond, because, or don't. I think that one of them was the if it's truly going to be added to well child checks, and those are already full for families that don't have a lot that they're dealing with, and it's just a routine check, when there are other things beyond, not even the pearls or the ACEs stuff, but then you're asking providers to add that in to time that already isn't there. And so then it was, well, what if it's just data collection to know what is affecting the community or how many are affected? And then we started talking about how, as a participant in that screening, giving over that information without understanding what to do next, or if I check every box on that page and it's a 15, what does that, what do I leave there feeling
So
like?
you're putting a big stop sign in front of us, let's think about this more carefully, because I hear an added value comment. Is there added value from the screen to what we already have? I hear don't just do something. Let's stop and say, is this useful to anybody to really do the screen, as opposed to just part of a protocol? And I'm also hearing, I want to acknowledge Lily's comment she wrote in about the impact on the family and what screening have they already had. This gets back to, are we communicating as a community? And if they've had this over here, like an ACEs screen, and then they show up over here and somebody does it again, really? And so how do we really share? Is there a place or a way to share information? Or I heard her comment as being really mindful of the parent's experience, and really, do we stop and understand what's happened? I mean, we're all like that, don't you? I go to my doctor's office and they hand me a pack of things and I just fill it out. But I feel like we don't want to do that if it's not added value or educational or useful to the family too.
And we have a lot of online comments, so I'm just going to read.
Okay, let's
few
go.
of
Are
those.
we going to counties or are we going to online people?
Some counties, some online people.
Okay, so we're going to do the counties one at a time, or if they've written in, because you guys can
they're
talk
kind
to
of
us, the counties.
here and there.
Are you going to do this online? Is that what you're gonna do?
Yeah. So we have CANS assessment, the benevolent child experiences, and then CPP. Then we have use non-judgmentalness, encouragement, seeing parents as experts, family empowerment, safe to take, using it to assess, not assume, building blocks, and cultural humility. And then Nicole, I will put you on
Put her on speaker. Put our counties on speaker.
Okay.
So we're on Modoc County now with Nicole, is that correct?
I'm about to.
Yeah, she's.
Okay, Nicole, you're good.
Nicole, can we hear her? We can't hear Nicole.
What we'd like to hear is kind of a summary.
Okay, hello.
Oh, there you are.
Okay. So as a group, we came up with some, and I'm trying to find them, and now they're lost. So everybody, let's share out. We have ACEs that we do. We do, we do the Edinburgh, the NIPSing, PHQ-9. They also have a local adapted screener for all ages and demographics of domestic violence, and a local intimate partner violence screener, as well as formal assessments. And then the ones that they would like to look at or possibly use is benevolent screener and also PEARLS. And benevolent is very interesting to a lot of us because we've had the 40 developmental assets training and the following trainings to that. So yeah.
Great. That's great, Nicole. And did you get all that, Susan? Did you? Okay. Okay, we're going to go to Lake County.
There was a bubble that said they left. I don't know if they got dropped, and I don't know if they came back on.
Oh. Hi, Anna.
Anna, can you hear us?
Lake County, are you with us? Okay. There's somebody. There's Anna. She's muted.
Okay. Oh, it does. It does. Hello. Hi. Miss Anna. Anna left us. She abandoned us for another meeting. So we are on our own. And we talked about that because of federal funding for some of our home visiting programs, we do 1 million screenings. We do all kinds, everything on the list and more. So there's no shortage of screenings going on. One of the things that that was brought up as a positive is that the ASQ and ASQ-SE screenings that are happening in the community, the regional center used to call out to the parents when they got a referral and verify that it was a good referral. And now the screenings that are being done with such fidelity that every referral is a good referral, and they skip that step now. So okay. That's been a big point of progress in the community. And then we talked about how, well, one really beautiful example that was given was from our tribal health community. They talked about how when they start with a conversation, not a screener. So they'll just listen. If a woman is willing to tell her story, they listen to that first and pull out as much as they can from it before they give them a bunch of paperwork to fill out. So I thought that was beautiful.
Yeah.
Of course, for the work, just being encouraging of the families and being non-judgmental while we're doing the screening.
The practice they identified as being most important was being positive and encouraging and non-judgmental in all of this, and ending with we talked about what brings you joy, and someone mentioned they always end the ASQ screening with people talking about what about your child brings you joy, or what in your relationship with your child brings you joy.
Okay, there's the joy question again. Yeah, great. Great. Were you guys looking at the word cloud at all? So I heard some of those words mentioned. So they were. Okay, great. Okay, let's see. Do we have Shasta County?
Yeah. Shasta, Alicia.
You're unmuted.
Alicia, are you there in Shasta?
Maybe I muted myself. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Okay.
Okay, great. You unmuted me and then I muted myself. Go figure. So we actually replied in the chat and you read it aloud already.
Okay. So you're the one that listed all the screeners that were being done. Was that you?
Yeah, we started with the CANS assessment, then benevolent child experiences, and then the CPP.
Because are you doing that already? some of it, or is that stuff that you would like to do?
They said that they are doing the cans. They would like to start doing the
Oh,
benevolent.
some of the other ones. Okay, so that benevolent one, I'm hearing a
And they're
lot.
already using ACEs.
And we use the SWIC.
They
and the
use
ASQ.
SWIC and the ASQ as well.
Yeah, okay. And any changes there about how you'd like to think about it? So I hear the benevolent part. Any other changes about what you'd like to do with screening?
Yeah, that's what she said.
I think she asked.
Yeah, any others besides benevolent? No comments. So
Okay.
apparently not.
Okay. Okay, so Mendocino, right? Is that, oh, you guys are having sound issues. Can they type in? Can you guys chat? If you can chat in there. So,
Lily also says for her project, we work with kids who have experienced trauma, the Champion Project. We are having the teacher complete a BASQ survey and then the school counselor complete a screening.
about the child. That's what I'm hearing, a screener about the child.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess the question in a way is, this is what I'm hearing from the conversation, but I want to hear other people make comments. But I'm hearing in part that from a relational point of view, how we use a screener and really whether the screener is an opportunity for a conversation or a conversation is in itself can be the precursor to a screener. You're extracting information, like the example, I think from Lake about the story. If a parent comes in with a story, what are we learning from what parents really tell us, and how is that screening is partially what I'm taking away. I'm hearing a lot of interest in a move towards protective factors and benevolence, and really thinking about, are we doing equal weight in some ways to some of those positive experiences. And I hear that we're doing a lot of screening, and that anybody with federal money and probably also state money has to do screening. So there we're looking at how are we using those screeners, and is there an opportunity there to, I heard a lot of little beautiful popcorn style vignettes about how screeners are opportunities to connect with families, to make an intervention, to really learn something. It's not just something that we're doing. And I want to make one comment about the comment about screening for numbers, because I'm very ambivalent about this. But I do want to say that oftentimes sustainability of all of our services is tied to some of these federal, state, and local funding sources. And they are really in favor of those kinds of tools because the numbers justify the funding. So sometimes, and I just want to put this pitch out there so you can join me in my ambivalence, but I mean some of that on the positive side. Sometimes you get the numbers and that gets you the money to get the services. So I just want to really say that. And on the flip side, the CANS is really interesting. In my particular community, I feel like they've been funding a lot of mental health services without really knowing if they're helping people. And so I think the CANS isn't a way to, I mean, the CANS isn't a good tool for that, I think, but I think there's a way in which we need some data to make sure that we're getting the right people and doing something that's actually helpful. And that's linked to funding. So I want to make a bit of a, it's okay to do it for the numbers kind of comment, because ultimately that's what's going to sustain our services too. So anyway, I think we're almost at the end of our time, and I just want to step down by saying thank you everybody in this room, in these counties. My roadshow will be in your community in way more forms. So if you have interest in anything that we have to offer, please don't be quiet. You have lots of ways to contact me and we will be there.
I want to just echo Barbara's thought as we're wrapping up. Thank you so much for your participation in today. This work that we're doing is not easy, and it's got complexity to it, but there's also great benefit and reward in really focusing on this early childhood piece and trying to lay a really good foundation in this earliest part of life. It's a really special opportunity and a privilege to work with families and children. And so I just give kudos to all of you. And I also want to remind you to fill out your evaluation forms and remember to scan, email, whatever way you're going to get them back to Bryn, to put February 20th on your calendars for part 3. And I think what we have really heard today is that there's another whole territory in screening that perhaps is not really being tapped into in terms of looking at some of those more internal resources like the benevolence. That came up in almost every conversation. People are looking for some of the other side of the equation. As we started out talking about, the fact that we are easily able to look at risk factors. That's what is a lot of what we are using in the tools. But we're looking for the protection side, and we're looking for that well that is within people. That I really liked the way we kind of framed it around what is the narrative of your life and how do you make meaning out of that, and what do we really carry around inside of us as resources that might not be fully tapped. So I just thank you again for the privilege of today. We will hope to see you soon. And is there anything I'm forgetting?
I have a final comment to the remote sites. That action plan that you hopefully filled out with your name and address and some things you're taking away, I would really love to have them. So when you hand your evaluation in, however you're sending it to strategies or scanning, if you would send that with it, they will get that to me, and that would be fantastic. And otherwise, I think my email address is on the beginning of the PowerPoint slide, and you can send it directly to me.
Barbara, would you maybe recommend they take a picture with their phone so they have a copy? Or
Whatever way you'd like to do it, but I will have a copy of it. And we're really trying to compile this, what people say, and try and find ways to support you to do what you want to do. So that's why we want you to really think about it, so we can come back to you and say, this is what you said you wanted to do. How can we support you to make this happen?
And that's triggering one more final comment in what Barbara is saying. That's one of the reasons why we have this partnership between what Barbara's doing and what we're trying to do, because Barbara is in a 5-year project. She has resources that she can bring in between learning communities. There are ways that we can build on each other's work. So please take advantage of the trainings and participate in the learning communities and those things that Strategies offers, as well as all of the things that Barbara's bringing to the table as well. So thank you again.
Thank you all. And thank you, Changing Tides. Thank you, Connie.
yes, thank you.